Hello. I am really excited now to introduce Jen Weedon and Sasha Mathew, both of whom are highly experienced trust and safety professionals, and you can check out their bios in the event doc. We've invited them here today to talk about the Trust and Safety Professional Association's new curriculum chapter on safety by design, which they were both leads on, and they will soon by the way, define safety by design. So this might be my opinion, but I feel like Prosocial Design Network and perhaps all of us who work on prosocial design are hugely indebted to trust and safety professionals like Jen and Sasha because they are, for the most part, on the front lines translating research into practice on tech platforms. I should also add that I'm personally indebted to Jen for how much she's helped me understand the challenges and complexities of translating research to practice. And I'm excited to continue that discussion with Jen and Sasha today. So welcome, you two. So we had a bit of a little email chat before today to try to unpack what is meant by safety by design. And there's kind of a double entendre there, right? So safety by design both refers to the actual design patterns that ensure the safety of users, but it also meaning that platforms should be thinking about safety by design as part of their development process. So do each of you want to take turns at parsing out a bit each of those two aspects of its meaning?
Yeah, happy to. Jen, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I can kind of briefly frame up why Sasha and I decided to write this chapter and sort of how I think about less the design patterns themselves and more of the overall kind of culture and approach towards thinking about safety by design. And I use air quotes because I think a lot of the some of the concepts here, there's not like one very single clear definition, right? Safety means different things to different people. And certain things very much depend on the context of the product that's being created. But essentially when I was thinking about safety by design work, I had spent most of my career looking at sort of the perpetrators, the intentional bad actors who are misusing platforms to achieve some sort of objective. And as you focus on that for years, you start to wonder, like, how might we prevent this or be smarter about this, given we keep learning the same hard lessons? And so, as I'm not a designer, but I became very interested in the ways in which teams discuss, in this case, safety and user well-being, how they make decisions about it, and how particularly the trust and safety teams that I've always been positioned and engage with product partners to include, design and engineering on how they can start thinking about this as early as possible, because we sort of, firmly believe that this is everybody's responsibility and not necessarily, just owned by a trust and safety team, right? So yeah, I mean, with the double entendre in terms of the development process, we came up with this chapter, like sort of considering all of the different ways in which trust and safety teams and safety by design discussions can be, with the different models that are out there that work, ranging from like very ad hoc to like something that's very kind of standardized and subsidized and endorsed by the organization. I think that our chapter in particular was designed towards folks who are not designers necessarily and are looking to kind of integrate, centering user well-being in an accessible way in different size organizations, right? Because a lot of companies don't have massive design teams or research teams, et cetera. So, for smaller companies or for trust and safety teams that may not have a lot of their own resources engaging with product teams, we wanted to come up with different ways to help people have their own discussions internally about what safety means, what risk means, when do they have these conversations, right? Ideally it's in the design phase very early on, but in some cases it may not work like that. So, you know, what are the other sequencing points at which people can talk about risks? And yeah, so basically we just wanted to equip other teams who are not designers by trade to think about concepts of safety, and hopefully equip them with ways to have these discussions internally, kind of democratizing it as a concept. Sasha, do you want to add anything?
Thanks, Jen. No, that was a great summary. I think what we're trying to do with the chapter is kind of capture the state of the art when it comes to safety by design. And so we're kind of describing where the industry is today. There is a lot of work happening across the industry. I know that some industry players are trying to bring other industry players together, trying to understand what safety by design means across different industries to different trusted safety professionals, because it is a term that is bandied about quite a lot, but it does mean different things to different people. It also means different things contextually for different industries, depending on their level of resourcing, their level of development, on the stage that they're in their trust and safety sort of life cycle journey. So we try to capture kind of what state of the art is today as a sort of baseline through the chapter. And then just in terms of my kind of kickoff point for safety by design work, one of my first trust and safety roles was at Twitter on their product policy team. And so our job was to kind of get right in there before a product was, right at the design stage. Sometimes a PRD had been drafted, sometimes not yet, and convince those product managers they needed to talk to us about why safety was something that they needed to consider at the inception stage. And depending on how successful you were, you could modify and influence design right up at the start, or you would kind of come in at a later stage and give them more table stakes things. And so a lot of that work was around trying to distinguish between what was the sort of design elements, how could you change the very design of the feature to promote prosocial behavior or safety, and then what else did you want to layer on in between, after the fact. So then you think about things like content moderation and reporting and like proactive mechanisms and so on. And also whose responsibility was what. There was just constantly tug of war, right, between centralized trust and safety teams and then product teams, who owned what, who was accountable for what, and us mediating kind of in between. So a lot of that also made us kind of think about the design of different features, build out a whole registry of risk, consider how this risk would manifest and present in different contexts and different geographies. And so that kind of helped us build the muscle, and we got very good at looking at these sort of half-developed features and trying to determine what would go wrong. And then, of course, sort of the next stages of that process is making this more mature, building it into company and organizational practices, standardizing artifacts, ensuring the products can't launch without this sort of sign off from us. So all of that is kind of captured in the chapter in different ways, but safety by design in that sense, part of it is the design elements, but the rest of it is the approach to safety and the organizational culture and all of these features, the kind of that we're trying to evangelize in terms of how people think about building products.
Thank you. I have a million questions, but I'm only going to, first of all, sorry, I was trying to add myself as a pin, but I can't do that. So I'll continue unpinned for the moment. This reflects so many conversations. Oh, here I am, yay. So many conversations that we've had before, thanks, Alex, about where safety by design is and should be, and getting in early on the process. I encourage everyone to dig deep into the chapter. It's really amazing. But since I only have time for a couple questions, I'm going to get to the prosocial design aspect of it. And Jen, you already talked about how so much safety by design initially was talking about bad actors. I love how you guys describe in your chapter, you define prosocial design as, quote, healthy engagement and content production among good faith, but sometimes erring users, i.e. all of us. I'm interested to hear more about how prosocial design, you see it fitting into the state of safety by design today, and then how much you think it should be playing a role. So I don't know who wants to take that one.
I can take a quick stab, which is that I don't think it's playing as much of a role as it could and should be. One example that I frequently reference when I think about an industry that does think about this in some ways is the gaming industry. Is that there is so much intentionality between or behind designing games that get people to do certain things, right? And so, you know, and ideally all, you know, these things are positive things about building community and sort of exercising grit and resilience, you know, trying to achieve something depending on whatever the game is. Of course, it's not it doesn't mean the gaming industry is perfect. It's not, but there's a great resource that the Thriving in Games group put out called the Digital Thriving Playbook that has a fantastic set of resources around this. It's very similar to what PDN has too, right? It's just like a slightly different concepts and words but it's, you know, a lot of the ideas are similar. And so secondly, I think, and this is kind of a trite answer, but like I think regulation is starting to play a role in forcing these discussions earlier on. And you know, I think I would love, you know, would love to, one, hear what Sasha thinks, but two, also, you know, I'm not right now, I'm not in the product world, like, or having those discussions with product teams. So I'm kind of curious for product leads on the call, you know, how they, if they're having these discussions as well. But Sasha, over to you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, again, to reference the dating industry, because that's where I work now, this is central, right, to the dating industry, because we are sparking connections between people in real life. And so if they're meeting in the real world, you want those to be healthy, empowered experiences. So we obviously have a number of pro-social features like toxic nudges, which prompt people before they send a message to think about what they're sending. If we detect that there's toxicity in the message, with features like private detector, which will blur a potentially nude image, giving people the ability to unblur it if they want or report it immediately. So we have all of those features in the online world. But the moment you go offline, you are exposing people to potentially unhealthy connections. And so what we're trying to do in a way is improve interpersonal relationships and the norms that surround interpersonal relationships, not just in an online context, but also in an offline context. And that's a really, really hard job. To do that, what we do is try and introduce safety pledges. So before people go on a date, we kind of give them, we ask them to make the safety pledge, just good practices around showing up to a date when you promise to. And then, of course, reminding them of our guidelines. What is sexual harassment consent? What does sexual harassment constitute? What does consent look like in interactions like this? And so on. But I do think that there is less research around this than I would like to see. I think, again, like a lot of this research, when we talk about pro-social design, is quite sector specific. It's also quite cultural. And so while we do have, you know, kind of baseline consensus on best practices, I think those are quite shallow at the moment. And I think this is an area I'd really like to see a lot more investment in.
You just queued up my next question beautifully. Thank you, Sasha. And wow, I hadn't realized you guys were doing safety pledges. That's kind of brilliant. But yeah, so as part of what we want to do here is not just translate research to practice, but also make better research and more actionable, relevant research. So if you two could wave your magic wands. Oh, by the way, this is my last question, so people start thinking about what questions you want to ask Jen and Sasha. So back to your magic wands, what kind of research would you ideally see the academic community and the larger research community focusing on?
Sasha, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick it off. I have a grab bag of things here. I was actually trying to make a list. But I think to speak to something I mentioned earlier, I'd like to see more situated research. I'd like to see more systematic reviews. Right now, we have often one or two pieces of research on a particular proposition. And so it's hard to say if, you know, whether that's replicable even to begin with. It seems like as time goes by, some of the assumptions that we taken for granted are being tested, and there is contestation. I'd like to see industries publish more of the research on which features that they introduce are based on. I'd like to see cross-industry collaborations within dating, within gaming, for example. Things like the use of reporting systems. How do people use reporting systems differently in platforms that are online to offline versus just the online platforms? IRL safety tools, some companies have things like, you know, the SOS buttons and things like that, but how do they actually work in the moment? I'd like to see more research around that. I'd like to see better research around encouraging healthy interpersonal interactions. What really works? And then how is there a causal relationship? How do you attribute behavior change in the real world to interventions that you're taking in the online world? There's a lot more, but I'm going to stop there and let Jen give us the rest.
I mean, that was fantastic. The one thing that that kind of stood out to me as a need, and something that I hear a lot from trust and safety professionals who are just trying to get internal buy-in and support for what they're doing, is the ever-present need to define the like tying safety by design efforts to the bottom line, right? Like everybody wants to know, like, is this how is this going to translate into retention and well-being, and how do we know? And you know, we have all these like proxy ways of talking through it, and I think there's, I don't know if Glenn, I think I saw Glenn on the call. You know, yeah, exactly, return on investment. You know, there's some I think there's some stuff out there, but more. And I think, like to Sasha said, the sort of industry specific slicing, you know, is useful, but also kind of across would be helpful. Yeah, so that was the main thing that came to mind, is just from a practical perspective and getting buy-in and support.
I love those answers, and now you're making me think we should be really reaching out to everybody in safety by design and asking for their wish list, because those are fantastic. All right, we're going to wrap up the interview section. I will stop recording.